Cognitive metaphor theory begins from a deceptively simple observation that the human mind does not think in pure abstractions, but instead leans on dense networks of familiar bodily experiences, such as moving through space, balancing, grasping, or seeing in order to structure concepts like time, justice, or probability. Once you really absorb that idea, the world you live in changes, because you start to notice that when people argue about politics or physics or consciousness, they are not just trading facts. They are also fighting over which underlying metaphors will set the frame for what even counts as a reasonable fact or a plausible story. You can hear this anytime someone talks about running out of time, carrying emotional baggage, winning an argument, climbing a career ladder, or defending a belief, because each of those phrases quietly imports a whole geometry of movement, force, and territory into domains that do not literally have any of those properties. Lakoff and other thinkers in this tradition showed that these are not just poetic flourishes layered on top of rational thought, but are instead the deep scaffolding that makes rational thought possible, because we map unfamiliar structures onto familiar ones in order to reason about them at all. If you are interested in metaphysics, this has sharp consequences, since many of the classic disputes about whether reality is made of substances or processes or fields can be understood as arguments about which root metaphors we should privilege when we build our models of what there is. Spinoza once described reality as a single unfolding substance with many attributes including mind and matter. And if you read that through the lens of cognitive metaphor theory, you might see it as a disciplined attempt to step outside everyday metaphors of separate objects and instead adopt a continuous flow as the primary picture. In modern science, the same tension shows up in the way we talk about forces pushing particles, fields filling space, or information flowing through channels, because each language brings different metaphorical baggage that shapes which experiments we imagine and which explanations feel satisfying. Even probability itself is soaked in metaphor, since we talk about random events as if they were draws from an urn, paths in a branching tree, or frequencies in an infinite casino, and each of those pictures guides intuition in different directions when we think about risk, causality, or free will. On the existential side, cognitive metaphor theory quietly challenges the idea that you can live with a perfectly neutral stance toward the world, because every story you tell yourself about your own life relies on some frame such as journey, battle, game, canvas, or garden, and those frames come with built-in values and expectations. If you see your life as a race, you will feel behind or ahead and will experience others as competitors. While if you see your life as a garden, you will notice seasons, cultivation, and patience, and your nervous system will track entirely different signals as meaningful. Dennett's notion of the intentional stance fits beautifully into this picture because he points out that we often explain complex systems by treating them as if they were agents with beliefs and desires, which is itself a powerful metaphor that allows us to compress bewildering details into a small set of purposes and constraints. We do this with people, with animals, with software, and increasingly with artificial systems. And even when we know at a technical level that a model is just a set of parameters, the intentional stance gives us a way to predict behavior by placing the system inside our metaphorical space of reasons and goals. The important point is not that these stances are illusions, but that they are tools. And cognitive metaphor theory helps you see the toolbox instead of confusing one particular tool for the structure of reality itself. Once you begin to notice metaphors as metaphors, a new kind of freedom appears, because you can ask whether the frames you inherited are still serving you, and whether another frame might reveal patterns that the first one kept invisible. In science, this might mean experimenting with new ways to picture a domain, such as thinking of ecosystems not as static balances, but as evolving games of strategy, or thinking of neural activity not as electrical wiring, but as a constantly shifting field of competing micro-narratives. In metaphysics, it might mean treating debates about mind and matter as clashes between different metaphor families rather than as simple yes or no questions, which opens up space to build hybrid models that do not have to fit entirely inside one picture. In existential life, it might mean gently trading a metaphor of solitary heroism or grim guardianship for one of participation in a wider cognitive ecology, where your role is not to carry the whole future but to help steer local flows of attention, meaning, and care. There is something quietly awe-inspiring about realizing that these metaphorical structures are themselves products of evolution, shaped by bodies moving through gravity, needing to find food, avoid threats, and cooperate in small groups long before there were formal philosophies or scientific theories. When you study cognitive metaphor theory alongside thinkers like Dennett and Sagan, you start to see humanity as part of a long project in which the universe slowly builds better and better models of itself, using whatever metaphors happen to be available and then inventing new ones when the old ones no longer scale. Artificial intelligence slots into this story as an amplifier and rearranger of metaphors, because these systems learn from our language and then hand it back to us recombined, sometimes exposing hidden assumptions and sometimes locking in old frames unless we deliberately push for more reflective use. If you approach that situation with curiosity rather than resignation, you can treat AI not as a final authority, but as a partner in exploring the metaphor, space, probing how a system describes time, agency, value, or explanation, and asking what that reveals about the underlying conceptual machinery. In that sense, learning cognitive metaphor theory is not just an academic exercise, but a practical survival skill in an age where language is being accelerated and automated, because it gives you a map of the currents underneath the flood of sentences. Once you see those currents, you can more deliberately choose which metaphors you want to live inside, which ones you want to retire, and which new ones you might help invent. And that choice quietly shapes not only your own experience, but also the shared intellectual environment we are building together.